Let's talk to Jim out of Ohio. Jim, are you there?
Uh, Yeah, hi. And by the way, I understand you're having some problems with your phone or something. If it means anything, I
Uh,
can hear you guys fine.
I think you're good, my friend. Go for it. What's on your mind?
Okay. Well, actually, I have two things. What I called about was one of these shorts that they have on YouTube. It's not like a full video. It's like only like a moment or two, but it doesn't tell the source. I came across one short for you. Excuse me, the line. Um, it sounded interesting, and I would like to see the whole video. All I can get is the caller was Sam, and what I said on the screen was a call for peaceful coexistence. Would you at least have the date for that so I could look it up?
I don't know. There've been a lot of shows.
So,
Did you want us to comment on the idea, the hashtag coexist concept? Did you want our opinion, or are you looking for the show?
The show, like I said, it sounded interesting, but it clipped it. Sometimes it'll run, and then you won't get the rest of it. So I just wanted to. I thought it was interesting, so I'd like to see the whole video if possible.
Jim, I think I may punt to the comment section and the producers of the line, and perhaps if they can locate that, they could post it in the comment section, and perhaps you could
Okay.
retrieve it from there. Would that be all
Oh,
right?
yeah, I'll give it a try. By the way, while I was waiting, I didn't call for this, so I don't want you to think I called to kind of slip something past you, sneak in. I just didn't think about it until I was listening. And by the way, I'm an atheist. I'm
Mhm.
not a biblical scholar or anything like that, but sometimes I think about in the story, in the fable about the Noah's flood, global flood, what, hap what happened to the bodies that were left behind when the waters receded? You know? I mean, you probably talk about at least hundreds, if not thousands, of corpses. Who buried them? Who cremated them? Or were they just left out there to rot? Because you had, as I understand it, like 8 people, Noah's family, and I'm sure a couple of them were children who wouldn't know, about burying or cremating. I'm just wondering, does anybody say what happened to the bodies that were left when the waters receded? Were they buried? Were they cremated, or just left to rot?
Paul, the millions of corpses
well,
that bumped against the ark, would do you have
so if I'm going to
thoughts
put on
on
my
what?
creationist hat, I believed in Earth creation up until a single digit number of years ago. So the idea is that the flood, that much water on the Earth, would definitely be churning the what was essentially the sea bottom at that point, right? The whole Earth was the sea bottom, and no
Yeah,
one's wondering where are all the dead fish, for example, right?
yeah.
I know some of them get eaten, but like these things naturally in such a churn would have stirred up under the sediment, and that is actually the creationist argument. They argue that all of the geological column that we see now all happened in that moment. So they posit such that there was so much churn happening underneath that all of those layers happened, and they even were hydrologically sorted so that the heavier ones were at the bottom. That's why dinosaurs are at the bottom and the light animals are up top, because hydrological sorting, of course, and that's just a phrase they've invented. But so no, they didn't, like, there would have been no concept of needing to be buried, right? Because you were under Mount Error at least height of water. So
So
that
the
you
earth
just
kind
you
of
just went to
buried.
the bottom.
So the earth essentially buried the bodies by itself when the waters receded, something like that.
Well, and that yes, and that the earth underneath the water would have been churning enough that basically everything was, yeah, in that whole process, as the rain fell and the fountains of the deep burst open. Of course, because the Bible says that the water was jetting out both from above and below, right? The waters of the deep were pushing up, and the rain
Yeah, the
from
firmament
below.
and
So, if you're going to accept those general premises, then you can imagine all kinds of scenarios where they're not so much worried about where the bodies were. Their problem is that they were buried in such a very specific order, in that the most primitive, evolutionary speaking, were buried at the bottom, and then there's no bunnies right below the dinosaurs. You'd think that if it was all just churn, random churn, that at least one bunny would have made it under a T-Rex, but they didn't,
Oh,
as Bill Nye rightly
oh,
pointed out. So
That would
that's
be a
more of the
great.
problem. And but they do have, within their own worldview, they have an answer to that question. It's not something they haven't
oh.
thought about.
Poor little
I want to
bunny.
start an indie band and name it Bunnies Under Dinosaurs. So I'm just going to make that note right here.
Yeah.
Jim, anything else, my friend?
Oh, real quick, because I don't want to hold you. I don't know how many callers you have, but something else I've been wondering is creationists like to say that humans and dinosaurs coexisted. So, to me, the first question, the obvious question would be, well, then where are all the dinosaurs? What happened to them? And if I were a creationist, I would just say, oh, well, they all drowned in a flood. I understand some creationists insist that they were saved, that they were actually on the ark. And when they point out, I don't know how large these dinosaurs are, how could they say, oh, well, God conveniently shrunk them down so that they withstand. So my question is, if dinosaurs and humans coexisted and they survived the flood, what happened? Why don't we see any dinosaurs today?
All right.
Jim, our
So
connection
I want
isn't
to keep.
great. Go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah. Let's maybe we can hang up on Jim,
Can
and
we answer
I'll
this
just
off
answer
the
this
call?
briefly. So but I don't want to make this a call of Paul apologize giving answers in Genesis apologetics here for, but the very brief answer is that they don't want to be able to say that God picked and chose certain species to die in the flood, right? They want to be able to say that God, because the Bible says every creature that had breath of life in their nostrils was to be saved. And so now that we know about dinosaurs, they would have to come up with a reason why they were excluded. That's more problematic than trying to say, hey, some got on, but humans are so good at hunting things that we just hunted them to extinction. That they genetically bottlenecked right down to those two individuals, like two sauropods and two T-Rexes, to everything, right? The humans basically got to them, and that's how, you guessed it, that's how we got the dragon's tails, and that's how we know that the knights were fighting dragons, is that some of those stories were real and that they were fighting dinosaurs, and that humans just hunted them to extinction. So that is the short answer, although those are the same people that also say that humans can't affect the climate today. So I don't know how consistent their story is, but that's the answer to that.
I've heard variations, though, Paul. If you visit the Creation Museum, you see humans frolicking with dinosaurs, coexistence. They're just hanging out,
That's
you know?
pre-flood, though. That's pre-flood.
Yeah. Well, I assumed it was all like I assumed the dinosaurs never made it past. I assumed as a
Mm,
believer that I like whenever I saw the Ark Encounter and Matt Dillahunty and I toured the Ark Encounter, which is a mind-numbing slog. It you can hear
hmm
the sound of they're literally brain cells walking to the edge of a platform and diving, just literally committing suicide. But he has like what looks like a puppy mill full of cages where they would put the baby dinosaurs, and he had larger cages for the raptors. And so he's saying that they survived and they all frolicked together. When I was a believer, we always thought that well, there were dinosaurs and they just never survived. And then the humans came after, or the flood wiped them all out. One of the conspiracy theories I'd heard was that God plants dinosaur bones in the earth to test our
hmm
faith, even though there were no dinosaurs. You heard that one?
I have heard that one, though I suspect this is a little bit like eating the dogs and the cats. The person who started that channel, or at least the modern version of it, the person eventually did come out and say, yeah, they don't actually believe that. But
The
absolutely, God
person, oh,
puts
wait, they came
dinosaur
forward
bones
and
here to
said they
test
were
our
just being
faith.
a Poe or what?
Yeah,
Because I've heard it
yeah, yeah.
from more than one source.
But
Granted,
that's
they
true.
were
No, I'm
online,
now
maybe
realizing
lost
that,
money.
yes, it does, the idea that God put there to test our faith, that even predates me. So for sure, yeah.
I love Noah's Ark. By the way, there is room on the switchboard if you haven't called 21 times in the last year or whatever. There is room for you. We've got a few others. The when someone asks me if I'm going to tackle the Bible, and this is on the larger macro stage, I don't do this with one-on-ones. I don't walk in with data points and try to refute face to face, at least at first. We get into identity beliefs and psychology of belief and why, the amygdala. And so walking in with data is not usually my first approach when I first engage someone eye to eye. But overall, when I'm on a larger stage, people are like, well, where do you start when you debunk the Bible? Do you start in Genesis in with Adam and Eve? And I say, no. I say I start in Genesis, but I start with Noah's Ark because Noah's Ark is a gift to counter apologists. It's a gift because every part of the story just falls apart upon the most cursory analysis, right? I'm sorry, penguins walked 8,000 miles to board a stadium sized boat in the middle of the desert built by a 500-year-old guy using only trees and tar? Really? When the animals were on the ark, what did they eat? What about the specialized diets? Herbs for, for the plant eaters and meat for the meat eaters and the giant pandas only eat bamboo. How the hell are you going to figure that out? How did you eliminate thousands of pounds of animal waste out of a massive ship with only one window? You know, all of this stuff. Why would he send the dove out to find land if he and God were on speaking terms only a few verses before? God being so specific that he gave him the actual blueprints, the qubits as to how to
Right?
build, and
Yeah.
then God goes mute and he says, "No, you gotta send a bird to go do recon, bring you back a twig, and that's how you know there's land." And since the the ark doesn't have a sail, a motor, or a rudder, it couldn't be steered anyway. So even if land had been 50 feet next to them, they'd have just coasted right on by. They'd have been helpless. And what did they eat whenever they landed? Did no one else on the planet own a boat? How did 8 people commit incest to repopulate the planet, creating more than 5,000 ethnic groups in less than 4,000 years? I mean, one point after the other. Noah's Ark is a gift for the counter apologist. That's my 2 cents. I don't know, where do you start when you start in the
Oh,
Bible,
no, so
Paul?
I mean, some of those things you hit on were literally my deconversion linchpin. Was when I went looking for some of those things didn't make sense to me either. So I said, well, I'm a Christian. I'm going to find the best possible answers to these. So Ken Ham apparently had the best possible answers, and I read them. And I remember literally dropping the book on the floor when it got to that kangaroos just floated to Australia. That's how that happened. And I'm like, this is the best. This is the best we got. I don't. And yeah, that was my whole domino. So you crystallized my thoughts eloquently on that.
Paul, I did not know this. You went to Kinham as an authority when you were a believer?
Yes, I absolutely did. I absolutely went thinking that this was going to get rid of the cognitive dissonance that was causing me problems when I was learning basic science facts. Um, So yeah,
Wow.
no, I went to him absolutely thinking that I was gonna read the book and be able to, wash my hands, get back to youth ministry, and not worry about these scientific nigglings any longer. Didn't
Those
work out that way.
scientific nigglings, that's almost as
Mhm.
good as bunnies under dinosaurs.
Right.
Scientific
I think nigglings would
nigglings.
open for bunnies.
So, sorry, I digress. I see a couple of calls here. I'm gonna go there. We used to see any boat-shaped land formation, and we
Mhm.
would in Turkey, and we'd be like, "Aha, aha, the ark has been discovered." I remember somebody estimated that they found some wood that must have been old enough to have been part of the ark, and they were excavated, and maybe it was Hal Lindsey in the late great Planet Earth that was talking about this kind of thing. And of course, then you dig at all, literally dig, and you find out that it's just dirt. It's just a mound of
Mhm.
dirt that happens to be shaped like a boat. And we were scanning the horizons for proofs that, that validated us. What's that line? We weren't trying to be right. We wanted to be proven right. And so talk about
Mm.
confirmation bias. It's pretty remarkable that you escaped young earth creationism.
I
I was a
know, I
devout.
know,
I don't think I was a
but I'm
6,000 yearer. So
I'm always the example people give though when people on my channel they comment, "No one can ever leave this." I'm like, "Where do you think I came from? I left it."